Welcome, everyone, to the Spiritual Forum. I'm so glad you're here. This is a podcast that will inspire you on your spiritual journey and hopefully bring you hope and just new ways of thinking about you, yourself, your life, your spiritual life, and the awakening that we're all in the middle of. I hope that you're blessed by this podcast. I know that you will be. Before I start, I want to remind you that we do rely solely on donations, so appreciate everyone who has donated in the past and in the future. You can do that at thespiritualforum.org. I also have a survey out for all you listeners. I want to hear from you. So you can go to the website for that, or if you're not on the newsletter, you can subscribe at thespiritualforum.org. Thanks so much for joining us. I'm excited to introduce my guest, Howard Eisenberg. Howard's a medical doctor with additional postgraduate training in both psychology and psychiatry. He's been a lecturer in parapsychology at the University of Toronto and an associate professor of medicine at the University of Vermont. On a more personal level, he's been on a lifelong quest to discover the true nature of reality. He was awarded the first postgraduate degree at McGill University for his parapsychological research on telepathy. And almost a half a century ago, Howard authored his first trailblazing book, Inner Spaces, Parapsychological Exploration of the Mind. And his new book, Dream It to Do It, The Science and the Magic, is the culmination of his successful quest to learn how reality works. So that's a lot, Howard. Welcome.
Sure is. It's taken over a half century to discover it.
I love that. Well, it does kind of date you a little bit.
Well, not in a way that isn't advantageous in this case, because it gives me the depth.
Absolutely. I'd be proud of that. Anybody who's been on a quest for a half century, more power to you. So I want to start, as I usually do, by asking you to tell your story.
Mhm.
And then before we get into, let's start with your message first. What's your overall message? If you were to culminate that in a few sentences, what's your message to everyone?
Okay, so to jump ahead, the reason I wrote the book, we'll go back in the history,
Okay.
Previous history before that, my story. But the reason I wrote this book is I felt a call. I was aware of tremendous problems in our world at all levels, and I saw more and more catastrophic developments. And as I was imagining some of these things happening, they actually were happening in the news. I was reading about them. And it got to a point where I could really literally anticipate various things that were happening, whether it was climatic disruptions, whether it was political and actual war, the stock market, weird stuff. But it was all very negative, very, very dark. And I saw an increasing sense of divisiveness amongst people all over the world. For all types of reasons, but with phenomenal stimulation of fear and anger, outrageous behavior. And I thought, like, wow, it's almost like the biblical notion of almost end times approaching, like everything. We can't reverse climate change. We can at best moderate, but we can't get our heads around to do that. We weren't able to manage the pandemic because we weren't able to connect and collaborate and care for each other. So I wrote it as a wake-up call to help people understand that it's not an accident that all these bad things are happening at all. And the reason is because we forgot our connection to our inner source from where we come and how we're ultimately all connected. Ultimately, as the mystics call it, it's oneness of the allness. And we're not just supposed to love thy neighbor or obey a golden rule because it's a law, because it has a lot of history behind it. It's because it makes sense. Life goes better. That's a long answer, perhaps, to the immediate question. But that was it. I felt, because of what I see, and I thought I'd come to know, I had to speak out. I had to at least try to wake people up.
Okay, great. So we'll come back to that because that's certainly the crux of my message and ministry as well. We are living in interesting times. We're not here by any accident, and we are here to, shift the paradigm, shift how things are going so that we can live how we are meant to live. Let's go back then to how you've gotten to where you are today, and what's generally your story.
So as a young child, and when I say that, like back several years of age, I remember being very curious about everything. even odd things like, being on a merry-go-round and experiencing how I sense the world differently, um, um, lying on the floor and imagining that the ceiling was my floor and what it would be like if I was walking from the ceiling down. So you're playing with different types of awareness. And then when I got to around adolescence, around age 12 or so, I started becoming interested in books and in reading, initially science fiction. And what I enjoyed about science fiction initially was it was so imaginative, it was so speculative. And I noticed as I was reading some of these science fiction books, starting again in my adolescence around age 12, that some of the things that were science fiction, both in terms of the content of these novels, these books, but even sometimes on the cover art, were starting to become realities. Like I was reading about, spacemen and the spaceships before we had a space program at all. And the diagrams that they had on these covers of the spacesuits, they looked like the ones we eventually developed. And all types of the apparatus they use as communicators and so on, we now have with our, cell phone technology and so on. So I started to see that what seemed to be just speculative imagination, and these weren't scientists who were just trying to extrapolate from their data, that there could be a connection between imagination and reality. So at first I was just playing with imagination just for the variety of ways of experiencing things. But then I came to understand there's a connection, potentially, a very, very important connection between imagination and reality. Another one that our culture has missed or has denigrated. We're told, for example, in primary school, when children are daydreaming, and I was very much a victim of this, stop daydreaming, pay attention. And yet, going into the other realm of awareness and consciousness can be very rich for so many things. For one thing, stress relief these days, for creativity, to come up with all types of wonderful things, whether it's music, whether it's visual arts, whether it's prose, whether it's poetry. That's where it comes from. And so that was my initial appeal, like the curiosity of awareness, the curiosity about the relationship between imagination and things that happen. And then as I was just extending my reading, I would go to, at that point, independent small bookstores and buy paperbacks, and not uncommon, they come up with 12 paperbacks in a pile. I didn't even have bags then, carrying them so proudly. And I eventually discovered that there was some serious research going on in what was called parapsychology by Dr. J.B. Ryan in North Carolina. And he was looking at whether there was a possibility of having awareness of things that seemed to be beyond our physical senses, and even perhaps an ability at times to influence things beyond our apparent physical abilities. For example, like laying on of hands, distant healing, where there seems to be some type of connection, transmission in a healing way. And yet we can't measure it with our electronic instrumentation, so to speak, or block it in some cases, because some people can do it with prayer, as you might know. Mm-hmm. So I became really fascinated in that research, and I actually eventually went out and met him, by the way. Took a bus all the way down from, at that time, Montreal to go see him in North Carolina. And I was fascinated that there was like serious research now going on this. I'll go back to it, connection between imagination and reality. And I was also, when I was younger, maybe now too, when I say I feel called, I had to speak my mind. I had to march to the beat of my own drummer, not because of stubbornness, and certainly not because of ego. It's just that the curiosity led me where it led me, and I wasn't going to just be pressured because that's how things were done, or that's how most people see things. I had to find my own truth, and eventually went on in my studies academically to do a joint degree in medicine and psychology, graduate psychology at McGill. And for my thesis research, I chose the topic of telepathy. And it wasn't coincidental that I chose as the strategy behind all of this, because at that time, the head of that psychology department was the very famous psychologist D.O. Hebb. And although this was Montreal, Canada, McGill University, he at one time was also the president of the American Psychological Association. He was worldwide esteemed. And he had said in print that he categorically rejected all of the evidence for psychic phenomena even though sometimes statistically it was more impressive than that in the more general realm of psychological research, because he considered it, and this was his word, a priori impossible, and instead saying it sort of theoretically impossible. And he even went on to say, because he was outspoken, that he admits his prejudice, even said himself, this is prejudice. So I decided not just to do this research, which I thought was fascinating, but to do it there, because I was trying to open things up for other people who had interest in this and were just being dismissed as quacks or nuts or various terms, unfortunately, in a derogatory way that have been thrown at people in this field. And I did succeed in that research and went on to teach it as a credit course at the University of Toronto. And then picked up other things. I was very interested always, not only through the curiosity, but also helping people. So I like to share things. And the way I mostly have helped people historically and currently, in my understanding of it, is by helping them become more aware broadly. So not just a wake-up call. So I work as a medical psychotherapist, and that's largely what I'm doing. I'm not prescribing medications. I'm helping people become aware of other ways they could see things, other ways they could process it, and other choices. And now there's always choice, always, no matter what. Once you know how to go back to a deeper level where you're not so distracted and caught up in patterns, it's infinite in terms of that resourcefulness, as you know.
Well, I love your story. I love how you first start out as the kid, the daydreaming kid. That that
Mm-hmm.
we want to tamp down on the spirit of our kids when they're
We do,
doing
and we
this
do, and we do,
amazing
and we
thing.
do.
They're daydreaming, creating. It's like, pay attention, get in line.
And generally speaking, when we do tests of creativity, the younger kids are definitely much more creative. And by the way, as an aside, do you know what profession is one of the least creative of all when they test adults?
Education?
Psychologists.
Ah, okay.
Interesting. So the people who are supposedly, masters of understanding the mind are some of the poorest when it comes to the ability to think creatively on these tests.
Very interesting. Yeah, that's very interesting. I think that's one of the places where we're just losing so much potential by telling our kids, stop, stop daydreaming,
Yeah.
stop creating. I also think it's just so interesting that you had this kind of opposition at McGill when it
Mm-hmm.
came to, telepathy and the
Mm-hmm.
paranormal. And that rather than, turn around and go someplace that you might have been
Mm-hmm.
more welcome, you kind of went right into the rejection area.
Potentially,
Which,
yes.
yeah, and
It, it,
it's interesting.
it's like the metaphor I use in martial arts where they train young children to split wooden boards with their bare hands in one blow. And I explain the way they do it is not by hitting the board hard. They're taught to hit through and beyond the board. So you don't hit the obstacle, you go for your goal. So
Right,
that's how I approached it.
right.
So yes, in a way, it was an obstacle. And there's even a further backstory. As I mentioned quickly, I did a joint degree in psychology and medicine. And I had to get permission because there's two different faculties at the University of McGill. And they denied it. And they said, you can't do it. No one's ever done this before. And I said, but just because it hasn't been done before, is that a reason not to go forward? Isn't this supposed to be a center of leading knowledge, leading edge? And then they said, well, every student has a student ID number on the computer system. You'd be in two different faculties. And I said, aren't they supposed to be here to help us? As supposed to be. This is true, by the way. And the third one was, we wouldn't know how to calculate your tuition because you wouldn't exactly be here totally 200% more time, still be the same library. I said, I'm not asking for a discount. And eventually they said, yes, they relented. So I now have those two degrees. So, but that's also an example, Carol, of what I've learned in my book. And I've connected the dots and understand in a much more powerful way. And back to where we partly started with the backstory about imagination and reality. So I imagined doing this joint program because it certainly wasn't advertised. No one had done it before. And yes, initially there was opposition. There were, three levels of it, so to speak, to block me. And most people would give up. And I persisted. It was more in my mind like, why not? My mother taught me. I joke she was my first guru in a way. And she taught me there's no such thing as can't.
Love it.
And it's really, I didn't realize as a child, obviously, and even as a young adult, how wise and powerful that was. When you have
Yeah.
more of a can-do mindset, cup half full mindset, wow, what a difference.
Yeah, and I think so many people have their minds programmed on I can't, I can't, I can't. Whatever happened in their childhood that they weren't raised with a mom that
That's
said
right.
you can do anything. So they have this constant chatter in their mind. I can't, or stop, or I've been
That's right.
rejected, go somewhere else, or I'm bad, and all of that.
Yeah, we call that in psychiatry negative self-talk or limiting beliefs. And that's part, again, my work as I say, is in educating people in psychotherapy to become aware. That's just a dialogue that goes on in your mind. That doesn't mean you have to tap into that stream, that you have to keep watching that channel.
Right,
that,
change the channel.
yeah, change the website, whatever. And then showing them how, various ways how to do that, as opposed to just trying to explain it away or using drugs to suppress it. And then, in my work in the university, obviously that's, again, educational, increasing awareness of people. And I worked at many different levels at different universities. And my books, this is my second, as you said. I also had a national radio series in Canada through the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation called Odyssey. Again, just meeting with interesting people to expand awareness. Hopefully I'll find other ways too, just giving you some brief sample. But to me, that's the common denominator, my mission, helping others by educating them, by helping them.
Yeah, and I
be
think
more
it's
aware of the
fascinating that
benefits.
you're not doing the medicine. You're a doctor. I have I don't have the best relationship personally with the medical world.
Mhm. Many people
I
don't.
Full
Sadly.
disclosure,
No,
full
I know.
disclosure,
I appreciate that.
because it seems as though that profession tends to look at a problem
Hmm.
and then apply medicine, look at a problem and then apply
Hmm.
medicine, and it completely avoid the system, which is
Hmm.
a bigger system,
Hmm.
and the cause.
Hmm.
So it's kind of like a more of a mechanic thing, and
Yeah.
the idea that you're working in psychotherapy and
Hmm.
psychiatry and not
Hmm.
applying medicine
Hmm.
is so refreshing.
Because it's higher medicine. I once had a bit of a debate with a patient who was a surgeon. And although he was my patient, he was sort of arrogantly suggesting, he was superior to me because he's a surgeon.
Right.
And I said, you need instruments to do your work. I do with words.
You what did he say?
He, he's, he couldn't,
He couldn't,
gaga.
there's nowhere to
Yeah,
go with
he
that.
gave up.
Right.
But to me, it
Right.
is. It's because, and even things like placebo effect, which some people have heard of, the so-called sugar pill thing, where you're sometimes fooled to think you're taking a real drug. And all the new drugs that come out that want to be put out on the market first have to go through experimental trials where they're compared in part to placebos. In other words, beyond being safe, are they more effective? Are they more helpful than just an inert chemical substance like sugar in a capsule? That's a placebo. And when the patients don't know which is the real one, because they can make them look the same on the outside or taste the same, many of them, approximately 1/3, have the expected result of the so-called medication, even though it's totally their imagination. And that's what I'm training. Now, if by contrast, we train people to get, because all they're doing is imagining, they're imagining that's, drug they're taking is helping them. And it helps them. And by the way, it even works in surgery. There's something called sham surgery, where they'll pretend, this is not done commonly, I wouldn't want to alarm any of your listeners and viewers, but they'll pretend they're doing a deeper surgery than they are. Like, for example, for the knee, they'll sometimes make an incision, pretend they're going deeper, into the joint and not at all, and just sew it back up. And many of the patients afterwards say whatever was bothering them before in their knee is resolved. They've even done it with angioplasty for the heart. Again, it's not commonly, these were special experimental situations. But when people really can believe sufficiently, and which again is the power of imagination, we're talking about this, it has physical effects.
Well, and I think ultimately you don't want to even have to believe that this medicine or this placebo is a medicine, but back up and actually imagine your cells healing
Yes,
in your body.
that's even,
So,
and that's where eventually people go more directly and have that understanding.
right.
One of the things that concerns me with my medical colleagues, I'm not defending them all, obviously, is that many of them, they're not just mechanistic in how they work with people, which is discourages patients from their own participation with their potential mind abilities, but they're so negative in their prognoses often. Like, they'll say you have this problem, and unfortunately, that's your future, either because of your so-called genetic history, family history, lifestyle, accumulated injuries, whatever it might be. And it gets me so angry when they're basically saying don't hope. And hope has power. Back to imagination
Absolutely.
and reality,
Right, right. I know. And I do think that overall, our world has a crisis in imagination. Like we've swallowed so much conditioning, and we believe so many of our basic beliefs, we can't even see them because it's like background, it's like water for a fish. We can't even see them. And we can't imagine ourselves out of it because it's always been that way. And there's so much of this that I don't even think, I think we could spend a whole lifetime thinking about what else we could imagine, but we don't know how to do it, or we've lost it, or we're just so distracted, or we're just lazy. I don't know. What do you
uh,
think?
well, I do think we once knew it and had it, practiced it much better historically. um, I think absolutely, for one, we're distracted. um, it's not uncommon, as we all know, when you see people out and about or in a restaurant, maybe in a family gathering, they have their cell phones out and they're texting or whatever else they do on their phones in the middle of their so-called company, or people walking distracted by it, sometimes dangerously, on the sidewalk or near traffic. That's not uncommon. um, we don't calculate things anymore in our head because we have smartphones that do that. We don't have to remember things because we have smartphones that remember that, et cetera, et cetera. And the more we depend on these smarter phones, the dumber we're becoming, in the process. So part of that, again, is distraction. Part of that, too, is overwhelm. It's like the expression, trying to drink from a fire hose. Not very comfortable, but we're just so overwhelmed by so much. And partly, sadly, it's also some people who manipulate what they want us to think and believe. And we're seeing this tremendously these days, as you know, on probably news media, particularly social media itself. And it's frightening because there was a time we'd all, or most of us who, let's say, watch TV or listen to radio, we would tune in sort of communionally, as a country, as a culture, to listen to the news. And it wasn't about hate thy neighbor, get rid of that school teacher,
Yeah.
burn that book. It was so different back then. And some of those news anchors, as they were called, were almost like members of our family, like we really respected them. So there's so little of that anymore. Like, who do you believe? And some people are driven in life, but not the majority these days, by authenticity, by being true, by being caring. But many are driven more by ego, by what power they can accumulate in various ways. It could be fame, it could be monetary, it could be political. It's different for different people, but people often can be seduced into that realm. And we, on the other hand, are, in a sense, their playthings. They're victims. Some of the high-tech companies actually have hired psychiatrists, psychologists to help inform some of their programming on their websites to make it more addictive. It's not like they didn't know. It's the opposite. They are doing some things absolutely intentionally, not just to know where we go and what we like, but to direct where we go and what we will see and be stimulated by.
Yes, and none of us think we're programmed.
In a way.
Yeah, I mean, none of
The
us think
rats in the
we're the
maze,
ones who are programmed.
That's
It's
right.
like other people are, but not me. I'm beyond being programmed. That's most of us think.
So that goes back, a little bit to where we started in my call, and another way of talking about this. So it's like we're all caught up in a nightmare. And so, in a way, all of us are in that nightmare, in so many different ways, whether it's death from COVID, whether it's somebody who was assaulted, somebody who's now dying on the battlefield in Ukraine, for different reasons all over, or someone dealing with climatic crisis. In so many ways, we're all in this kind of victimized situation, except for the so-called 1%, live the good life. But in a way, I repeat, it's like a nightmare that we're in. In a nightmare, you're experiencing something very unpleasant, but you also feel relatively powerless. You're very much like in a victim in a nightmare situation. And to go back to the dream metaphor, there are some cultures like the Sinoi of Malaysia and the ancient Aboriginal culture, which still exists in Australia, of valuing the dream world, not just daydreaming, what we call night dreams, if you like, much more so than we do in a more dismissive way here in Western science. In fact, in the Aboriginal system in Australia, they refer to it as the dream time. And they consider that level of awareness, for them, reality, more real than we call our waking reality, which they experience, of course, as well. But they think that level is even, more profound, more real. And they use it partly for healing and for learning things to become wiser in some areas. There is a form of dreaming, which I describe in my book, because I try to also give some techniques for people, not just to understand this, but to work with it and experience it. So lucid dreaming. So in lucid dreaming, by contrast, you learn to be able to have some control of your dream while you're in your dream, the opposite of a nightmare. And a theme you keep hearing me reiterate here, as I go all over the place, is that connection between imagination and reality. So if you can learn, and lucid dreaming is just one way to do it, if you can learn, and everyone can, by the way, and I think I give pretty, I hope, explicit instructions for how to do that, it changes everything. You're no longer, it's like, for example, the difference between Shakespeare saying, all the world's a stage and we're the players on it, which has some truth to it, by the way, and realizing that even though it may have some truth to it, but we're not limited to that. We can do also improvisational acting. We don't have to be stuck in the same role.
We don't have to read the script.
Or to follow the same script, right? But a lot of us don't question that. And I use also in my book, as you may recall in the beginning, Plato's Allegory of the Cave, which I savor ever since philosophy many years ago, and as an undergraduate. The notion that our ignorance is what largely imprisons us. And back to where we were, coming from, the distraction we have, the overwhelm we have, even losing the ability to think and reflect for ourselves. One thing that we used to have more so in many schools, certainly in high schools, and it was almost common at one point, were debating clubs or debating societies, which is a very interesting intellectual exercise, because to be a good debater, you have to take either side, whether you believe it or not, pro or con, and get into so deeply and so convincingly that you might win in terms of objective people looking at which is the more convincing presentation argument. And we don't generally do that anymore. So people have lost that ability, in a sense, to see things through other people's eyes or walk on other people's moccasins, so to speak, which is a really good thing, to have had. As I say, some of this we did have. And many of us right now are consuming our print information, how should I say, by either smartphones or perhaps on a computer screen or a pad. And we're doing very briefly. And very few people these days, proportionally, will look to books or even full magazine articles. They don't have time. There's too much out there.
Even the things on the cell phone can be too long.
That's right.
I
but it's different, because when you're reading a book, for example, it's inviting you in a way and encouraging you to go potentially deeper. Sometimes, for example, in fiction books, as an example, we're able, without even trying, to picture in our imagination the scenes, the characters are described. And sometimes when people actually see a movie adaptation of it, they're disappointed.
Right. That's
their
not
own
the way it's supposed to
imagination
look.
was richer, in some
Yeah.
way. Mm-hmm.
When people are looking at their cell phones or listening to the news, they also have this confirmation bias. So it's like their mind's going out and latching on to what I already believe or what I already know. And so I don't want to bring anything else into my world because that's disturbing. I only want to have what's in front of me reflect what I already know or believe or agree with. And so that we're all in our little silos with our own little belief
and what you
system.
just said is true. And unfortunately, even worse, they're not even aware they have that prejudice or bias.
Right.
They really think they're saying things as it is, or hearing it, as it is,
or thinking it themselves.
Yeah.
And I say that I think we're it's not like I'm the only one that doesn't do that. We all do
Mhm.
it. It's just, but you're talking about being aware so that we can be aware that we're doing this. That's the first key to
Yeah,
coming out of,
absolutely.
the matrix. I want to read a couple of quotes that I have from your book
Hmm.
that kind of reflect what you're saying. We're born into an edited reality version of the
Hmm.
experiential world.
Hmm.
We see things as we are taught to see them. And everything you perceive through your senses is like a simulation that immerses you into a virtual reality. Once you learn to identify your egoic self with the simulation, you become emotionally entrapped in it. Do you think we're in a simulation?
Well, if you mean in a computer simulation, no. And I know there are actually some people who think we're in a
I
computer
know some
simulation
people
from
do.
some civilization of the future. But fundamentally, what they're saying is wrong because it still goes back to what I say in my book. It comes from God, from source, from universal mind. So even if you're talking about some advanced civilization that has put us in a simulation, where do they come from?
Yes, right, right, right. And I
And
think the
where do they
simulation,
get their consciousness and so on?
right,
And
right.
how can they also bend time, to be in our future and so on? So no, I mean simulation, just like a dream, because often when we're in a dream, we don't know we're in a dream till we wake up, good or bad.
Right. And I
So in
was
a sense,
thinking
a dream is a
also,
simulation.
right, I was thinking also maybe Plato's cave, where,
Hmm. Hmm.
you're seeing the shadows on the wall
Yes,
and you're thinking that's what reality is. We're
right.
thinking that's what reality is, and the shadows on the wall. And people who don't know the story of Plato's cave,
Hmm. Hmm.
if I remember this right, there are people sitting
Prisoners.
in,
Hmm.
prisoners,
Yeah.
prisoners watching the shadows on the cave, but the shadows on the cave are being made by people in the background. And so, but they think that's the reality. One guy escapes, he comes out, he's like, oh my gosh, there's a reality out here. And he comes back to tell everyone, and they think he's the nutcase,
Yes.
and that what's reality is the
Right.
shadows on the
So he
cave.
theoretically was going to free them, but they were too afraid to believe him, and
Right, and
follow
this
him.
is the
Yeah.
this is the real problem with awakening. And I shouldn't say problem. This is the challenge. This is what we're faced
Yes.
with when we
Yes.
go through our own awakening process, and
Yes.
suddenly you're like, "Oh my gosh, I see reality in a completely different way." And as you say, I can imagine, I can co-create my reality, and it's very different, and we're not trapped. And but everyone's like, "No, no, you're crazy. You're a nutcase, and this is our problem. This is the way
Hmm.
reality is." The process of awakening is very, very painful
Yeah.
sometimes.
Well, so is on this level. I use expression different levels of awareness and reality, dimensions, however you want to put it. Birth is also traumatic, both for the mother and the baby. If you
Yeah,
think about it, I mean, seriously, it's a pretty hard entry for both of them
right,
into a new future for both.
right, right.
Um, I'm not one who says that once you understand what I'm conveying in the book, that everything becomes simply, how should I say, easy. um, we still have to work at things. Um, I like, in a way, the philosophical notion in Buddhism that life is hard and unfair. Um, it's it's largely what you also make of it, which is, the teaching. Like, it's not in Buddhism to eliminate suffering, if I understand correctly. It's to eliminate unnecessary or reduce unnecessary suffering. Um, and so again, it's not that once you understand things, you can have this like absolutely perfect life. Because I think there's reasons why not only that it sort of can't be that way, but why in a strange way, ideally, it wouldn't be the best to be perfect. Because it'd be like, if you had your perfect meal at a restaurant, like in every way, everything, every aspect of it, and the service and the presentation, and even perhaps the cost, and anyone else around you, and everything was just perfect. But like Groundhog Day, would you continue to go back every day for the rest of your life and still experience that anywhere close to perfection? I doubt it very much.
Interesting.
So
Right.
so we need some inherent variety and challenge to be at our best.
Yeah, variety is a spice of life,
Yes.
literally. Um, so the thing that I really underlined in your book was now is a critical time to use our collective power to dream up a better world for our shared dream reality. And I think many of us are on different reality timelines. Many of us have different senses of what is catastrophic.
Hmm.
There's different sides, different perceptions, different
Hmm.
everything. But I think
Hmm.
most of us are like, like, holy crap, this world's crazy. Like, it's crazy, it's going crazier. I think most of us have some sense of things aren't right or things aren't what they could
Hmm.
be. And many of us who have a longer history, like you talked about how it used to be when we watched the news and it was
Hmm.
kind of a social thing that we
Hmm.
did. And the news was so different back then. There are children, well, not children, they're adults who have never seen news like that, adults on the planet now who've
Hmm.
never had
Hmm.
these kinds of experiences.
Yeah.
So I think for them, they think the world may be a little crazy too, but I think it's been crazy for most of their lifetime. And I think those of us who've been on the planet longer
Hmm.
see the shift that's happened over the last, 50 plus years.
Hmm.
And like I've been saying to my husband this morning, it's like, I think that everybody who are more seasoned in years have a
Hmm.
propensity to look at the world and go, it used to be, and we're kind of
The
nostalgic
good old
about
days, you mean?
what, right, exactly. A little nostalgic about how it used to be when we rode our bikes in the streets and
Hmm. Hmm.
we weren't
Hmm.
worried about all the things that we're worried on.
Hmm.
But there's also a sense that, yes, that is true, but things are accelerating and things seem to be more and more negative, and we do seem like we're on the brink of even World War III right now.
Yes.
So this is a serious time. So it's not okay to just go la 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 la,
No, when my book, when a manuscript was completed, which was in the fall of 2021, it actually came out on November 15th onto the market as such. Back then, I noted that the doomsday clock
Mhm.
was set at a alarming record, the short 100 seconds before midnight, and midnight was considered the end, annihilation, and it measures things like probability of nuclear war, pandemic mismanagement, by the way, artificial intelligence, by the way,
Mhm.
that's in
Mhm.
there too. So it was 100 seconds again to midnight, which was alarmingly close. It just been moved that close. And that was the fall again of 2021. And as of just several weeks ago, they came out with their latest evaluation of the state of the world and various risk factors, considering everything, including climatic changes. And now they moved it to 90 seconds before midnight. And these are not alarmists. These are esteemed scientists internationally from many different areas. I think our internet just froze there for a minute. Um, so now, when I look back, when I wrote that book again, that was before the Russian invasion. That
Yeah,
was
yeah,
before runaway
yeah,
inflation.
yeah, yeah.
That was before the increasing turbulence in your American political system, threatening some very basic institutions going forward. Um, that was before some of the major climatic um, extreme damaging events in various parts of the world that you may know of. I mean, as you know, the West has been in a record drought. Pakistan, more than half was underwater. Um, there were
Yeah, so
huge fires
right, I think we
through
know how
Western
bad
Europe.
things are.
Um,
So what
but
what
my
it
point
would
is, but all this came after, like, so it was, 190
right,
seconds. That's not just the
right.
point. I felt that call before all this.
Mhm.
To me, sadly, this is all evidence, proof, some might call it, of what I kind of envisioned and feared. And I was trying to help wake people up so we will change course while we still have a chance. I still think we have some window opportunity, or wouldn't be, speaking to you this way, but I don't think it's a big one. And
Well,
I don't think we have a long time ahead of us at all.
let's talk about let's talk about what we can do, how we can use our imagination. And because I do think that what can happen, I know this can happen. We can get really fixated on the doomsday stuff or what
Mhm.
is all we get fixated. We can get it's kind of a lower density place or low vibration place, and we can get pulled
Yes.
into it. I think it's like the temptation of the ego to get
Yes.
drawn
Yes.
into it. It's like a quicksand, and then we can't pull ourselves out because we're going
Good
down.
example. Yes.
And so, but I fundamentally believe in the divine within in us, and I fundamentally believe in the light and love and our capacity as divine beings having a earthly experience. And I do believe in our capacities, our gifts, our gift of imagination, which is just the beginning to picture what's possible. And that's what I said about a half hour ago. So there's a failure of imagination that when we get sucked into the quicksand versus think
Yes.
about how we can get out.
Yes.
And not only how we can get out, but what beautiful world we can create. And so what I'd like to talk about then is what steps can we take to activate our imagination and to start dreaming a new reality?
Well, I can give you some very, concrete things going forward, but let me go back and reference what you said too about, your understanding and your beliefs, and come back and quoting some parts of the Bible. God is love. Love your neighbor as yourself. So to come back to your question about how do we maybe work with imagination and dreaming in a different way, maybe by going back and reflecting, and I try to explain in my book why it's not something just to believe in, but it's totally proven in so many different ways, scientifically and logically, philosophically. And since the book has been out, not one single person has had any criticism whatsoever about any of the facts or my connection or my conclusions. Nothing, not one. Doesn't mean there won't be. It's an imperfect world, and we don't know everything is going to come out. And there's all types of people at different levels of awareness and different intentions, as we know. Some people have just been blown away by it. It's just, been overwhelming. But no one has found fault with it in any way. Let me go back to your question now. So if God is love, and if mystics like a psychiatrist, R.M. Buck, wrote of his experience, spontaneous mystical experience, and he experiences unity with everything, and came to what he thought was the insight, that the fundamental, the most important thing in the universe is love. And he wasn't going to religious perspective, it was just a mystical experience. But he was also a psychiatrist, and not just dismissing it or being schizophrenic. And then in my book, I explain that contrary on this level reality, again, as I speak about it, we're taught that the head brain is what produces our mind, our consciousness. And I point out, strangely enough, there's no evidence for it. There's not even a theoretical explanation for how it could. But even back on that level, if we want to talk physical body, well, then we have these three brains. We also have a heart brain, and we have a gut brain, the microbiome. Let's talk about the heart brain for a moment, because it's related to your question, I think, I hope. The heart has its own nervous system. It has neurons, like brain cells in the head brain, about 40,000. It has its own memory system. It has more nerves going up to influence and control the brain than the brain has nerves that control the heart. The heart can also produce its own hormones, like oxytocin, the love hormone, by the way, which connects. So if we were guided more by the heart, there's an expression, heartfelt wisdom, or a heartfelt message. We use that term as if it's like deeper and more valued, and experientially. And we don't really have time to go this in any detail, but when you think of how you feel in this level of your body, your heart area, when you're in the presence of someone you really enjoy being with, someone you love, you just enjoy being with, there's a softness, a warmth in that area. And by contrast, when it's someone whose views you abhor or feel fearful of, there's a tense, a tightness, a coldness in that area. And if we use that almost like a compass to guide us more in how we interact with people, to come more from the heart in terms of the warmer connection, then we're in what some people have called, it's a core frequency that connects us all from the heart. If we also go back to working with eyes, poetically, many of us have heard the expression, eyes are the windows of the soul. And on one level, it's just an expression. On the other hand, as some of people might know, the back of the eye, which is what's responsive to light, the retina, is actually brain tissue. It is part of the brain. So in a sense, it is the part of the physical brain that's most, external in terms of where our skull is. When you care for somebody and they're in your presence, you usually look at them in the eyes. When people first fall in love, they become all entranced looking into each other's eyes. And unfortunately, they often forget what got them there in terms of the connection. No, it's true. And back to, distraction. So trying to make this more tangible. So if people in general be more guided by the wisdom of love, that love connects us, hate and anger separates us. You can actually learn to use, in a sense, the sensitivity of your own heart area to guide you like a compass where you're coming. You could also partly use, as you understand this, as a judgment when you're hearing other people speaking, whether they're politicians, preachers, police officers, someone on the riot, whatever it might be. Are they coming from anger or are they coming from love? If they're coming from anger and fear, that's a warning sign for you. At least like traffic light, yellow light, pause, do something you don't do too much, reflect, think. Are they speaking the truth? Are they really leading me in a good direction? And we don't do that enough, So again, if we were more comfortable looking at each other in the eyes, and I mean even strangers, and I'm not talking about steering contests, obviously, but just making more of that eye contact, which unfortunately during the pandemic, so much of us have lost. And it's wonderful we have technology in part, like Zoom video, but still not quite the same thing, as you know.
Right.
So even those two simple things, to be more guided, I say, by the importance of love as connection, using your heart and your eyes and the physical realm to partly help you with that. And the guidance of which, it makes sense logically to me now, scientifically, of the golden rule. I mean, if we're all connected, of course we should love our neighbor as ourselves. Of course we should do unto others as we have them do unto us. Because at some level we're all connected. Like it's not that otherwise you're a sinner or you're breaking a law. No, because your life goes better.
Well, yeah,
so does everybody else's. It's a win-win
that is
scenario.
The rule of the universe. I mean, there's like one law. There's one law, really. We don't need all these other laws. That's the one law. If we just live by that one law,
Yeah.
A lot of people call that natural law, God's law. That then we wouldn't need anything.
I know, and using that other term you said, God's natural law. I try to explain in my book that scientifically now, it doesn't have to be a matter of faith. We can prove the reality of these concepts in terms of their wisdom and their benefit. Even going back to the heart, when we are more caring for other people, which we call altruism, at some level is just being more attentive to someone and comforting them. For some, it might be more charitably doing something on a larger scale to help someone in need. But when we're coming from our heart in a helpful way, no matter how it is, our stress level, our stress hormones go down.
Mm-hmm.
Even if we're very stressed ourselves, if we redirect our attention to be helpful to needs of someone else, it reduces our stress. Back to my point, like this is science-based now. It's not just about faith. It works. Life goes better.
Right. So, and I think that the golden rule has been, we've known about that for thousands of years and we're still having trouble with it. So what can we do with the imagination? What about the dream it to do it? How do we apply that? What do we want to dream to do?
Well, I think we have a dearth of good leadership in the world right now. And sadly, almost at all levels, partly because people have lost the ability to think more deeply for themselves, as you know, and plus they're so disconnected from each other. There's not the synergy and collaboration. So I think to partly realize that what we're experiencing now, as I said earlier, it's more like a nightmare. It's not like just that's how things are and have to be.
Right.
It can be changed. And,
so we can create this as a lucid dream.
And to imagine, for example, if you could think beyond some of the limiting beliefs, the filters of what religion you come from, what political ideology you generally subscribe to, what home team you support. And if you could remove those types of filters and just look more objectively, who is good, who is better, who should we support, who should we follow? But you have to use your reflective ability. I made a quick reference before about Garden of Eden, the tree of knowledge, and how we were tempted out of that by ego, by emotion. Um, we need to go back to knowing. We need to go back to greater awareness. We need to be more humble in our assumptions of what we think we understand and know. And again, try to go back to what we were before about the mess the physical world is in right now. If we were so smart in science, really, that we understood how things work, how could it be so messed up physically right now? And I don't mean just climate change. I mean, we have phenomenal chemical pollution all over the world right now, which is affecting all types of species genetically and will for eons to come if we survive that long as a planet.
Well, we can solve some of these pretty fast.
But but back to the good part.
Yeah.
So if we recognize that as we experience things right now, it's not the way it has to be. And the people who are our current leaders, authorities, maybe they are where they should be, and maybe not. Why take it for granted? You have a mind, use it, think, reflect, question, share. And as we become more aware of the craziness we've been caught up in, I would hope that sanity again would prevail, so to speak, and we'd realize more our commonality. We're all in this together. Many years ago, the architect and philosopher Buckminster Fuller used an expression, a metaphor, spaceship Earth. Saying like we're all like on this same spaceship, and at some level we have to cooperate. There's only so many supplies, and there's only so many waste facilities. We have to work this out as a system. And he wasn't coming from a mystical point of view at all. He was an architect and somewhat of a philosopher, but that's the notion we have to get now. So how do you begin? By, as I said, visually and by the heart, start connecting and relating differently. How about using different choices in how you, what you focus on, what news media, if any, you listen to anymore? Maybe invest more in actual meetings, if you can, safely with other people.
Yeah, I mean, I could tell you how my world has changed in the last 3 years. I don't listen to any news media anymore. I don't do any left and right politics, any of that. None of it makes any sense to me. The sides don't make any sense to me. I can see them now as manufactured divisions.
Yeah.
And we have to transcend these manufactured divisions.
Absolutely.
And not take the propaganda that's coming in and start living, like you say, as the golden rule. And I also believe that I believe in individual sovereignty, and I also believe that we are one. We're all connected. And like last night, I was anticipating this conversation. I was thinking about imagination. What do I want to imagine? Like if I was a child, and somebody said, "What world do you want to imagine?" Now a child, I think you even refer to that in your book, that the child is the kingdom of God, is be as a child to enter the kingdom of God. That's in scripture.
Yes.
And it takes a child's mind, a beginner's mind, to be able to really go, what world would I want? Because a child would have no problem drawing, whatever they want, the sun and the flowers and the
That's
people.
right.
And
they don't have the filters
and
we have.
they don't have any of that.
Right.
They would just do that. So I was thinking about this last night, and what the closing thought I had, I think, before I slept was this statement. I envision an explosion of love flowing across the entire planet. So these are the words that came to me. And so then I started drawing that in my head, what would an explosion of love look like? I mean, we know what explosion of bombs look like. And then I questioned, should I even use the word explosion? I'm like, yes, that's the word. And so then I'm in playing with this and creating a picture of what would it look like if all of a sudden our hearts just all open at the same time, and we lay down these divisions that are false, completely false, and they're created by the 1% or whoever it is out there who are
it is
masters.
Sadly, to a great degree.
I think so.
We've also in some ways allowed it to happen. We've been asleep, on our watch, so to speak.
Well, and I envision a world, I think, but the last person I talked to on the podcast, we talked about spirituality and government. I don't even think we need government to rule us. That if we really recognize our amazing divine nature, and if we live by the golden rule and understood that, and knew we could work with our differences without having all of this
That's
government
right.
and these leaders who are leading us astray most of the time anyway, and leading us into war, for God's sakes.
And there are some groups out there that I'm involved with right now that are looking at alternative models of governance and living.
Yes.
It's more like smaller communities
Right,
where you
right.
know everyone, and
And you
it's
make the agreements.
balanced.
This is
Yeah,
what my community is
exactly,
going to do, and
exactly.
this is what this community over
Hmm.
there does.
Hmm.
And we can imagine these things. And I do think you do make the point in your book that a beginner's mind be like a child again to enter the kingdom.
Hmm.
You have the scripture where there's no vision, the people perish.
Where I think we are right now,
Right,
largely.
right. So I just encourage everyone who's listening to start creating this vision. Like, what would it look like if an explosion of love just was flowing across the planet and landing in everyone's hearts? What would that look like? Because I don't think we really know what that would look like.
One of the things that I was also hoping for this book, um, and that is that it would provide a different type of resource, particularly for the clergy of all denominations, and I mean all denominations, to help the people in their congregations or bring people into their congregations. Again, not because you're supposed to, because this is the family's, religion and heritage, or you'll be punished,
No, I don't do
if you
that.
don't.
We don't do
No,
that.
I know, but in the world broadly right now as it
Yeah,
is, but because this is the truth,
yeah,
and we'll explain it to you. It's not like we were told this was the truth and just believe it, but we'll explain it to you. This is how reality works. This is how the one can be many. This is, as I say in my book, we can be amphibious beings. We can live on more than one level at a time. We can be with the one, our source, God, and we can also manifest, individuate temporarily into what seem to be like individual things, people, other sentient beings, temporarily, just like the waves, come and go in an ocean.
right, right, right. Um, okay, so I kind of want to start wrapping up.
Mhm.
I do know that I wrote down a few more things in your book that I think might be good to just kind of close on, and
Okay.
I'll give you the
Hmm.
last statements. But you have, I think, I wrote down key factors: intention, imagination, and belief.
Hmm.
And then I also wrote down befriend your own attention, choose to cultivate an optimistic mindset, and develop soft eyes, perceive negative space.
There's a lot in there.
Those
So
are
which
things that
part's
came into the
which part's
book.
the question?
So I don't know, let's just talk a little bit about that and let's close. I think that befriend your own attention,
Hmm.
choose to cultivate an optimistic mindset, and develop soft eyes are like three things that people can start to do, like today.
So they're all about, again, awareness, different levels of awareness. And with soft eyes, normally when we look at things, we sort of look at them individually. We focus on them individually. Uh, with soft eyes, you're almost looking more at the space between things. You're working more with your peripheral vision rather than your central vision. And it's a different experience in consciousness. It's subtle, but as I say, I try to give people actual experiences from the exercises in the book, so they don't have to just believe it or not scientifically. And that's the reason. And so in soft eyes, you're seeing the space between things, which connects everything. With sort of regular hard eyes, we see things individuated
Yeah.
separately. So that was the notion on that one. Um,
Befriending your own attention.
I'm sorry.
Befriending your own attention is also, isn't that just paying attention, like being friends with what with
So
your
so
attention so
so
you can
much of the time these days, our mind, as I mentioned earlier, is taken up by either looking at our smartphones or wondering what's come in, or thinking of something we want to send out,
it's
and
addictive.
and so it is addictive. By the way, it totally is.
It's designed that way.
It literally on a dopamine level of the brain, how it works in terms of the chemistry of it. And again, a lot of, as I mentioned, website companies are taking advantage of that for various reasons. And as with us knowing about it, we're like, again, just running the maze, not knowing it.
Hmm.
So in befriend your attention, it means become more aware, first of all, of being aware and being a center to some degree of awareness. I talk about the notion of centering in the present, in the here and now. The past, as we know it from our own memories or from records or books or videos we might see of the past, whatever it might be, is gone. It's past. The future, even though we may strongly fear or anticipate certain things, may or may not happen the way we think it may happen, because it doesn't exist yet.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing that exists right now, the only reality we all experience right now, literally, as people are listening and watching to us, is right now, this moment. And in this moment, we're fully aware. And in that awareness, we can become more aware of our choices of what we want to focus on, what will better serve us or benefit others, instead of just being caught up, as they were, in the maze, or influenced, by peer pressure or what other factors it might be, but not really coming from our reflection about what do we really value and intend, desire, and choose to do.
And then choosing to cultivate an optimistic mindset. I think that's a good place to.
So that goes back to the notion again, partly of, filters and lenses. And I made a brief reference to it earlier. I made a lot of references, not too much. That we can choose to look at things in different ways. It's not like it's all just fixed. And when you look at things in different ways, like I did at McGill University, convinced them to give me 2 degrees and green light for it, it's empowering. It can make things happen that otherwise cannot happen for you. So it's a much more, resourceful way at looking at things.
Yeah, an optimistic mindset. And also the other thing that I took from your McGill example was the board, where the goal is beyond the board, so that
exactly.
The kid who's going to hit the board and break the board, they're not focused on the obstacle. So we can't be focused on the obstacle. We can't be focused on how terrible things are. We got to look at what is beyond that as we move our energy towards it.
What lays beyond that we can envision, realize, intuit.
Yeah.
That is desirable, that is, beneficial.
Yeah.
And that's empowering. I mean, little kids break boards and they don't hurt their hands.
I know, it is amazing. I remember that, and I remember doing that myself. I remember doing that with my daughters. It's really amazing. But thinking beyond the obstacle,
Yeah.
And that's where we can dream and imagine.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Howard, this has been a pleasure talking to you about your book, Dream It and Do It. Do you have any last 30 seconds what you want to put out there, or are we good with what we've said?
I really appreciate your time and your viewer and listeners' attention. And I wish you all to be open to what I'm sharing, because it can make a difference fundamentally to your life, to our world. And we don't have a lot of time to take advantage of that difference.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And again, I think we need to focus our imagination on what's beyond the obstacle as we move through it. And also, I kind of want to leave people with this idea of this explosion of love flowing across the planet and helping us to recreate a new world, because I think it's possible. I definitely think it's possible. So we all got to get to work.
I do
with
too,
it.
or I wouldn't be doing this.
Exactly. All right. Thank you so much, Howard. And thank you, listeners. And I now close the Spiritual Forum.